All right, welcome back to another Wright Stew podcast. I am Paul Stewart.
I am Brian Wright.
And hey, snowy days in North Carolina, but we're making it through. We're fighting through this. And spring is around the corner, Brian. As soon as the snow melts away, the grass will be peeking through, the flowers will start to bloom, and then it'll be time for baseball to get around here.
Dude, it's incredible that we go from, and it's great about North Carolina. You get all seasons, and you typically don't get a long winter. The older I get, the more I realize why people move to Florida, right? Because this stretches of 30 and 40 degrees. And so, yeah. Like you said, though, it's around the corner.
Yeah, it's cold. And it felt like, so I only had to do actually one high school baseball tryout when I was in school, my freshman year. Because the other 3 years I was playing basketball. But it always felt like this week. So this is like tryout week for high school baseball, high school softball, spring sports. It feels like this week was always the worst weather you could pop. The week before, like last week was beautiful, really nice. Always felt like, hey, you get a day in the 60s, really nice, get ready, geared up. And then tryouts come and it's going to be dreary and cold and wet and raining and just going to have to muddle through it. So,
well, just to echo what you're saying, I don't love, at least in North Carolina, how they do it in regards to there's literally no practice time before games. Like there's literally like a week. And I know we've talked about it. You don't need chemistry and all this stuff, but you kind of, if you're truly being an honest evaluator as a high school coach and you got a significant size school with new people coming in, you would like a minute to figure out, hey, should this guy play short? Should this guy play sack? It's a very tight window. In North Carolina, by the time, if you're in high school, you better be hitting by Christmas, give or take, because this sneaks up on you really quick, and then games sneak up on you really quick, and essentially you're fighting for playing time, fighting for stats, and fighting for W's, and it just happens. I wish there was a little bit bigger window before they actually play.
Yeah, well, I mean, but then, if you got school, you got timelines, you got to get the state playoffs in, that sort of thing, and it makes sense why you got to start so early, and I don't think you can do tryouts and things like that any earlier. I know in other states they do where it's a little warmer, but I think it's just kind of the nature of the beast, what you got to do. So.
Well, I don't like that they got to wait for the winter sport to end before you can have that was our excuse. Like, at least what I've been told around here is, hey, you got to wait for the winter sport to end before you can have the other tryout. But I'll argue the other side of this. But they're having other sport workouts all year long.
Yeah.
I just saw these windows that opened up, and like football would start having workouts in March. So if you're trying to play both, and baseball had workouts in the fall if you were trying to do both. How are you doing both? So I don't necessarily love any of it. I kind of would like just a hard season that will allow us to be able to just say, hey, this is your season. You're not going to get penalized if you're playing another sport, and you're going to get, your full opportunity to showcase your skills, just because there's a lot of talent in this area. But on the flip side, there's so many windows where they're doing these team practices. And I'll be honest with you, team practice, how much better do you think you get as an individual in team practice?
In baseball?
Yeah.
As an individual, you get less better. You'd be better off just going to the cage with your old man or your mom and just getting some swings in or getting some ground balls or things like that. Unless you're one of those common, like second base, shortstop, I can see where that works on. Hey, Brian likes the ball here. He likes the ball here. On ball up the middle, I'm going to flip it this way. Like, but as an outfielder or a third baseman or a pitcher, no. Like you don't need that. Just find a way to get you some ground balls, and we've kind of discussed that with some different sports, right? It's like even with my daughters in like middle school softball, it wasn't great softball. I mean, there's realistically a couple teams that were kind of good or kind of good, and during practice we're like, man, they'd be better off if I just went and worked out with my two daughters and said, all right, the rest of the team can fend for themselves, sort of thing.
It's such a tough dynamic, right?
So time, yeah.
We coach, but it's also one of those things where it's a tough dynamic, because if you were to go get ground balls, and like you said, if you go with somebody that can hit them, you could have 50, 60, 80 ground balls and
100 as many ground balls as you want in an hour and a half, 2 hour period.
And the reality is, if you're in a team environment, maybe you get Even
One,
I think we do a pretty good job splitting stuff up into stations and trying to have stuff. But maybe you get 25 if we're really trying to focus on that skill today. I do think there's some things that happen with mindset, right? I think if you get with good coaches, there's some things that can happen. But if you're an older player, I don't know. The time to get better really is time on your own, and you kind of gotta during practice, you kind of gotta showcase what you're capable of and prove that you deserve a playing spot. But
yeah.
as far as getting noticeably better, I just think it's interesting how the emphasis is on practice. Obviously, other sports, football, basketball, it makes a difference. But
Yeah, you've got
yeah,
plays and things like that. Yeah, and I know that's a lot of when we put together our practice plans. It's, hey, let's work on first and third defense. Let's work on bunt coverage. Let's work on infield outfield relays. Let's work on catchers throwing down to bases. Things where you have to have 2, 3, or more people involved in that. We still try to do our building blocks, our fundamentals. Glove work, knee work, things like that for positions, and we try to break up as much as we can, give specific instruction to position groups. But at the same time, yeah, realistically, if you're on a team that's not great, it's a tough thing to do because you're trying to balance out. Like, I'm trying to get better, but the coach has to coach to the middle sort of thing. And it starts to weed itself out, I think, middle school and beyond, right? Certainly at the rec level, that's what you're there for, right? You're there to learn and be coached and that sort of thing. But as you get older, it can be frustrating.
and I think we maybe missed this because we're coaches. All our kids, or a lot of our kids, go to school at different locations. As far as middle school, used to when you're growing up, part of going was that camaraderie. You were playing with your friends that you went to school with. I think that ends so early now that
Yeah.
there is something lost there. There is, I remember definitely when I was a kid, not only would we talk about baseball at school, we would play it in the playground, and then we would go and practice together. Or in some cases, there were multiple teams that were in our area, and we played against each other. And so there was a little bit different. So there's some camaraderie that's definitely lost because of how things are set up now. But on the flip side with travel baseball, it kind of is what it is, and hopefully we're teaching mentality and some basic skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Brian, speaking of not so great, I mentioned the other day that I gave up a California League record, 6 home runs in one game. So it actually tied a record. There's another person that did like in the 1940s or something. So it got me thinking. There's actually a website we can go on and find the California League records. And so I went and I was scanning through and I wanted to see. So I was on the Stockton ports in 1999.
Makes sense.
And again, I was in Stockton as well the next year for a little bit of it. But they changed their name to the Mudville Nine. So apparently it was where the guy who wrote the song, or the Casey at Bat, the kind of the story, the poem, he was from that area, so they changed it to the Mudville Nine. So and then it went back to the Stockton porch, I think, a couple years later. But as I was looking through, so a couple interesting bits of information. So in 1999, the Stockton porch, a pretty significant year for California League records.
Okay.
So we had myself that gave up 6 home runs in one game, tying a
Pretty awesome
record. 2 guys on my team tied the league record by being hit by a pitch twice in one inning. So Greg Schaub, our right fielder he's a right fielder, cannon of an arm, never hit like they wanted him to. They turned him into a pitcher. So he was one of them. And then Jose Colon, one of our outfielders, also got hit twice in one inning. Mark Cridlin from the University of Texas tied the league record for most sacrifice flies in a season, had 16 in a season.
Oh, that has to feel good. You think about how big a difference in average that makes. That's a good year.
Yeah, so you take away 16 at bats, you get 16 RBIs. But Stockton was a big yard, man. Great place to pitch. Ball didn't carry. Sun set in left field, and hitters had a tough time seeing. I gave my home runs up in Lancaster.
Okay,
where the ball did fly.
I was confused.
And
yeah,
so,
I was like, you're not helping your case here.
No. So Stockton was a great place to pitch. The northern part of the division was great. The southern part, though. So I looked this up also. In 1999, the same year, there was a league record tied by 2 teams they hit 8 home runs combined, or the team hit 8 home runs in a game. So one of them was actually Lancaster did it not against us, believe it or not. A whole different game they hit 8 home runs.
So a lot of juice on the other team,
So
clearly.
the Lancaster
Ball's
Jets
flying,
hit some
but
home
yeah.
runs that year. So they did that in August of '99, and also the Modesto A's hit 8 home runs in a game against the San Jose Giants. And the Modesto A's were a buzzsaw that year, man. They had Eric Burns was on that team. A guy named Jason Hart hit like 31 home runs. Esteban Herman was on that team. A guy named Jacques Landry, who he had a bunch of home runs. I don't think he ever made it up, but they had some boppers on that team. So also, also in the California League record book. So this is really cool. So we have our athletes you should know segment. So as I was pulling up my name, it was all kind of the bad pitching stats that were lumped together. So
Makes sense.
most home runs in a game, but right above that was most walks in a season. You know who it was?
Our boy.
Steve Dowkowski. So I felt like kind of honored and like kind of such a full circle moment. I was like, oh, there's Steve Dowkowski.
And that clearly wasn't planned. It wasn't like you looked at the stats, saw him. It was somebody that you kind of knew.
Yeah.
And so it is what an oddity. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so Steve Dowkowski, and then right under it, the big guy, Paul Stewart. I wonder if the Dowkowski family's looking at his stats and like, who is this Paul Stewart fella? So we've going from bad to much, much, much better. So I've been a big proponent for Sammy Sosa. I grew up a Cubs fan, and his 1998 through 2004, I argued, were some of the best seasons, the best 7-year run of all time ever. And so I kind of put my money where my mouth is. And so I started looking up, hey, what are the best 7-year runs? So I put it together on the spreadsheet, and I pulled up what I thought were like 19 of the best seasons. Again, this is Paul Stewart. I used a little, Google search and Chat GBT and some of Chat GBT is not always great, by the way. They threw some bad information out there at me. But so I'm going to share this sheet with you. And Brian, you've kind of taken a look at this.
Yeah. I've seen a bit of it. I mean, it's not really surprising the names that you see on there.
Yeah.
There's some obviously from different areas where different stats meant a bit more. You saw Ty Cobb with a ridiculous average through 7 years. I think it was 389. You saw Ricky. Obviously, Ricky lost his life here recently, but Ricky with his stolen bases, what was the stolen base number?
So Ricky Henderson in a 7-year period had 627 stolen bases. I don't know if that's ridiculous. The most in a 7-year window, but it's got to be really close. It's got to be up there. So, but some of the numbers that really jumped off. So two guys I put on this list twice: Babe Ruth and Hank Aaron, because they were so good and so consistent over such a long window. So of this, Babe Ruth has the highest WAR in a 7-year window, 71.5. He also has the second highest WAR at 66.3. So the first one was from 1920 to 26, and then the second one was 27 to 33. So wow. Babe Ruth was absolutely killing it. The one that really jumped out to me was home runs, is why I said Sammy Sosa. So Sammy Sosa does have the most home runs over a 7-year window at 367. McGuire is next at 345. Babe Ruth at 330, Barry Bonds at 329, and then Ken Griffey Jr. at 311, and then Babe Ruth again at 307.
Yeah, two pretty good 7-year stretches for Ruth, but it's hard to argue Sosa. I think he just hadn't done enough. He's kind of gotten weird. I feel like Barry's kind of, you see him around, see him more likable. Yeah. Sammy, he really hid after everything, and skin changed colors a little bit, and so it was, I think there's some. I think there is some awakening to that. Hey, we should just. There was a lot of guys on it. There's guys that are in the Hall of Fame that were on the juice or took it at some point in time in their career, and so I do think there are guys that are kind of opening up that these guys should be available to it, but it's going to take some other committee, and they're all for the Hall of Fame ballots. But yeah, phenomenal stretches of really good players.
Yeah, a couple other names that just stand. So over a 7-year window, Lou Gehrig had 1,087 RBIs. But crossing over that same period, Babe Ruth was second with 1,021 RBIs.
Which makes no sense.
I mean, those guys were just knocking each other in. They were not whoever's batting leadoff in second. Those guys were they were scoring 100% of the time. Just a ton of hits. The other one that I thought was interesting on here was Hank Aaron as well. I tried to pull up his best seven. He was so consistent over just such a long period of time that he. I mean, it's just hard to even put in words what it looks like. So two separate periods from 57 to 63, hit 276 home runs. And then from 66 to 72, hit 275 home runs.
As you were telling me about this conversation, obviously we knew his name was going to be on there. I didn't know it was going to be on there twice.
Yeah.
But one of the things that he did as at least a young kid, I couldn't find. I thought I heard him an interview on it or a conversation where literally as a right-handed hitter, he had hit cross-handed, and there was there were some ideas that maybe that increased some tendon strength, did something. I mean, obviously he didn't do it when he was in the big leagues, but I mean later in life, it wasn't like he was 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. It was significantly later than that. And
so by crosshand, do you mean so typically as a right-handed batter, your right hand is on top? So you meant his left hand was on top and right hand was on bottom?
Yes. Yeah. So for a long period of time,
how does that even work?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, because Hank Aaron wasn't a big guy, and he wasn't playing back in the 20s and 30s, and he still created a ton of juice to all fields. And you see his swing and see how it's broken down. He did a lot of things right, but he also mechanically worked very fluid and threw the ball. And but yeah, how that worked was essentially how you would imagine it worked. If you'd never picked up a bat and you swung and you had your right hand on top, it's going to feel goofy, right? It's going to feel goofy. It would feel goofy to me now, but if you had never been told the right way and you had success, yeah, that would.
I wonder if there's more bat control or something. So Ty Cobb used the split grip.
And that's been some drills. Like when I came through, that was one of the drills to try to figure out more top hand. If you needed more top hand, especially if you're getting under a lot of balls. Split grip. I mean, matter of fact, I've seen somebody who's come out with like a little product tool or something where it forces like a split grip kind of deal.
Like a little gap in there, like a little break.
Yeah. And so, it comes off, and your hands are kind of offset, but there is a gap. And so the idea is, hey, you recognize that you need more top hand when you have that gap, right? And it forces that barrel maybe not to get so far underneath the hands to where you can control it. But it's a really interesting story of how these guys were never taught to hit. That were pretty damn good hitters,
I don't think they were paying $50-$60 a week for lessons. They were just doing their thing, yeah.
And I'm not saying the pitching is the same, but you go back in some of those days. Obviously, we talked about it with Steve. The mound during that time, late 60s.
It went from 16 inches to 10 inches. Yeah,
that's right. So it was lowered. So there wasn't a ton of hitting then. But even in the 60s and 70s, when Hank was doing his thing, there were still some guys who could really throw it. And so, I think it just comes back to. I think this is kind of a soapbox for me. Like sometimes early on, you coach out the natural biomechanics of somebody, right? And your son's body works different than my son's, and all the other kids that we work with, and just how their body works is different. And there's some consistent mechanics that you need to get to, and typically good hitters' heads don't move, but that's not completely. Olsen for the Braves, his head moves quite a bit, right, until his front foot gets down, then it stops. And so. There's just I think there's something to just allowing kids to be athletic and not trying to make everybody into one robot.
One mold, yeah. Well, that was interesting. I had lunch with a good friend yesterday, and we were talking baseball, and we were talking swings, and he mentioned Roberto Clemente, crazy looking swing. You mentioned
he hit off his front foot, his back foot come off the ground. I mean, he truly, we've done this drill. That was another drill we did. It was called the Roberto Clemente drill, which literally your front foot, you're standing behind your back foot as far as your weight, but still your back foot is literally coming off the ground. And there was a lot of swings that he did like that in games and drove the baseball.
Yeah, and a couple of we mentioned like Vlad Guerrero was kind of notorious for being kind of all over. Frank Thomas, who was one of the best hitters of the 90s, early 2000s, right? And he was a massive human being.
That would be my only thing I'd argue about a lot of these guys. If Frank Thomas would be one, obviously Aaron Judge, you see kind of what
the teacher man stuff, yeah. But that was one of the things. Frank Thomas was on his front foot. He was on his front foot a lot.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Absolutely.
but again, when you're 6'6", like 260, 270, whatever he was, yeah, you got a little. And he was played tight end at all. Like he was just a massive. You can do some things like that. So I think ultimately what it comes down to, like you said, when the ball's in the hitting zone, foot down, hands back. Another one we talked about too was Gary Sheffield, because there's some video of his son going around. His son, I think it was at Florida State. It was. And somebody sent, one of my best friends, he sent me a video, and it was a Twitter thing or X, and it said, "Hey, who is this by the swing?" And I was like, "Dude, I don't even need to look at the swing. I just need to look at one little flip of the bat in the batter's box. I can tell you who that is. That's little Sheffield." So yeah, so it's interesting, and I tend to agree with you, Brian. It's and you see that sometimes when you get to college or pro ball. It's like, hey, like you guys recruited me or drafted me to get here for a reason. This is the way I do things. And as long as you're healthy, it's like, well, let's learn those. And I think that's what good coaches and good
Well,
organizations.
we had a policy, and I think you guys mentioned it too. Cleveland had a policy at the time where they didn't mess with you for the first year. But I'd say my brother was a little bit earlier, and he was very much a kind of old school, drive himself into the ground, and they tried to change him immediately. And so I do think there are some different thoughts to that. But I would tend to agree with what you said. Hey, there's a reason that we liked you.
Yeah.
So let's give it a chance to see if we can work at this level and higher levels.
Yeah. If you get people out, you're getting hits. Hey, let's roll with it. And again, that's what makes, I think, sports really fun, because you can be Jose Altuve, 5'5", or you can be Aaron Judge, 6'8", and still have high levels of success, right? And really, that's why I think baseball is the ultimate kind of everyman game, because yeah, in basketball, if you're not 6'6", it's going to be tough for you, right?
It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard
to get to the highest levels, right?
That's
So
right.
you can play in college, and there's different levels of that. In football, if you're not running a 4.4 or below, or you're not
or really a humongous,
massive big donkey, yeah, you're probably a little trouble.
Well, I'll keep saying it. I mean, the greatest players historically, and I think it's changing because there's a lot of guys. I mean, I watch all these games, these college baseball games on TV, and every one of them seems like they're 6'2", 225. But the greatest players of all time have been traditionally 5'10" to probably 6'1". I mean,
6'1", yeah, say 6'1" in that frame, yeah. So
I mean, you look at Hank Aaron, you look at Mickey Mantle, you look at all the. I bet if we went back and put height on that list.
Yeah, I think Bonds is probably like 6'2". I think Griffey was like 6'3".
Griffey is the only one. Bonds is 6'1" according to everything online.
Okay.
His head got bigger, so that's kind of hard to judge. I mean, does it just get wider? Does it go up as well? I mean, because he did look like a machine running around the bases his last handful of years with the Giants. But anyway, yeah, I mean, Griffey obviously was really good, but I bet if you took the rest of those guys off of that list, I bet 15 of the 19 that were on that list are under 6'1".
Yeah, I'm looking at the list now. So we got Gehrig and Ruth, I think, were in that frame. Ted Williams wasn't super tall. Mickey Mantle, Pujols.
No, Ted Williams was 6'2", 6'3".
He's lean, really lean, yeah. And the amazing thing when I was looking at Ted Williams' numbers here too, he lost 3 or 4 years, like prime years, like 23 to 26, because he fought in World War II. So
incredible.
Yeah. But Ricky Henderson, Todd Helton also star quarterback as well, right?
He doesn't get the respect. I'm glad you brought him up. He really don't get the respect for that span. And you mentioned it when we were talking about it. Colorado probably hurts him, but he really should get a lot more respect for what he's accomplished.
In the 7-year period I had from 99 to 05, hit 341, had 807 RBIs, 241 home runs. And I know Colorado, like you said, Colorado kind of. I think people say, hey, you gotta decrease some of that numbers because of that, but those numbers still count. Those are still their numbers, right? He did half of those things on the road. I love to see the home road splits. But the other thing about a lot of these guys on this list, I mean, it's like super athletic as well. You look at Bond, Ricky Henderson was a 3-sport star in high school. Yeah, all these. I think Mickey Mantle played football, baseball. Mike Trout was a superstar in football, and I think played basketball and baseball as well. Clearly, Willie Mays did it. Like all these guys were playing multiple sports.
Yeah, good athletes playing multiple sports, and again, kind of back to how we started this. Let's keep encouraging that as long as possible. I know most guys can't do it in college, and there's only been a handful that have been able to do it professionally. But you want, while your athletic window is open, you want to play as many things that you can to allow yourself to become the best athlete you can. Then if you decide you like baseball enough, you can work on that skill enough to get where you need to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, hey, thank you all for listening today. Thanks for indulging in my stories of California League infamy. But I'm glad I got to see that I'm on the same list as Steve Dalkowski somewhere. So it makes me.
You're on a list.
I'm on a list. On a list. But hey, thanks for listening. Hey, hope you enjoyed. Hey, make sure you're subscribing, liking all the socials, everything out there. And if you're listening on Apple Pods, hey, give us a rating, give us a review, leave a comment on there so other people will, when they're searching for something, will pop in their algorithm, and that'll help us out tremendously. So we appreciate that as well. But otherwise, have an amazing day.
Out, go back.